One day, 17 years ago, a 6-year-old girl from a noble family said, "I will marry the most handsome man in the world." She then pointed her finger at the boy, who was surrounded by other noble girls. The boy heard her and saw her pointing her finger at him. Then I thought, after this incident, my life began to fall apart. All noble families are the same. The girl also added, "The only thing that catches my eye is his face." The mother put her hands on her daughter's shoulders, also looking at the boy. Inés Valestena de Perez. She belonged to one of the highest-ranking families of the Grande de Ortega, an alliance of 17 noble families granted peerages by the emperor. This girl was the one and only daughter of Duke Valestin, and the one who rejected the prince of the empire and refused the role of princess. Such a revered and intelligent girl could choose anyone from a variety of suitors. But her choice fell on the heir of the Duke of Escalante, who stood out even among other nobles for one reason only: he was too handsome. This girl was none other than you. Never forget that I like you, Carcel. That's what you said then, and yet now you leave me. The boy sincerely sobbed, holding out his hand, not wanting to part with the girl. Years later, he thought, how was I supposed to know what your motives were? The breakup was not easy for the guy. As an adult, the man looked at the girl in an all-black, fluffy dress. She noticed him, opening her eyes wide, and he said, smiling, "But, Inés, you are my son." They looked at each other without taking their eyes off. He had only one thing on his mind. No matter what sadness may be hidden in your past or our future, I will stand here forever, waiting for you. I hope that this time you will love me too, as I have loved you all this time. It was already late evening. A man in a white uniform was followed by a red-haired girl in a green dress and short hair. She addressed him with a stutter. "Please wait a minute, Lord Carcel." Blushing, she looked away and continued, "I'm sorry, but could you help us? The Countess complains of severe dizziness. I don't know what to do. It's just us weak ladies here." The girl froze, continuing to describe the situation. "It seems to me that she is only experiencing simple dizziness. This has happened before. Once she rests a little in silence, she will feel better. But her residence is located on the very outskirts of Mendoza." The man turned around, looking at her. The red-haired girl opened her eyes, thinking in admiration. This is indeed him, the son of the greatest noble family in Oteg, and also the most handsome man in Mendoza. A man's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He turned to her again. "My lady?" The girl shuddered, immediately blushing, and then, bowing slightly, said, "I'm sorry. So, we were waiting for a gentleman from whom we could seek help." The Lord listened carefully to her story. "But not a single soul passed by, no matter how long we waited. That is why we experienced such great relief when you appeared, Lord Carcel." Not far from them stood 3 more ladies, looking in their direction. The man said, smiling slightly, "Yes, looks like it's really urgent." He took the girl in his arms and carried her, listening to her speech. "I am honored to know that a gentleman like you is protecting the waters of the empire." She spoke quietly, blushing slightly. "I heard that your grandfather devoted his whole life to serving Ortega, and you decided to follow in his footsteps. They say you wanted to continue your family's noble work. And yet, when I heard the news, at first I was simply shocked." The Lord listened to her carefully. "After all, you are the heir of the Escalante family. The Núñez Sea is still a dangerous place where battles occur quite often." She literally admired this man and his family. She continued, "The great victory of your grandfather, Admiral Calderon, was enough to bring us peace for a brief moment, but the pirates still cause so much trouble every year." The man answered immediately, "As a member of the Grande de Ortega, I learned that with my power comes great responsibility. Grandfather always told me that in order to occupy such an honorable position, you must be ready to accept this responsibility." Grandes de Ortega, an alliance of 17 noble families who were awarded peerages by the Ortega imperial family. But even among them, the Escalante family was considered the best of the best. The heir of this influential family, whose incredible appearance was the envy of everyone, he seemed truly blessed by the Almighty. By the age of 15, he was already spending time in the company of all the ladies who had reached adulthood. By the age of 17, fans followed him everywhere. At 20, he began dating older and less significant women. His insatiability knew no bounds even in his youth. Carcel Escalante de Esposa. Now, at the age of 23, he was in the prime of his life. The girl he was carrying in his arms was now pressed against a column to give him a passionate kiss. She said something, but he did not listen, looking at her. Looking at her, he thought. I didn't sign up for this, but now that I think about it, why did I even agree? Suddenly, the girl spoke again. This woman is too simple. Your bride, or rather, she is not good enough for you, Lord Carcel. He looked at her, listening carefully. Of course, she is from a noble family, and after all, belongs to the House of Valestan. But she always looks so bored, uninterested in anything. How can she behave like this when she has such a perfect fiancé like you? The Lord decided to answer, This is really overkill. She's not some kind of nun. Turning his head, the man saw his bride, while he continued to hug the other. And now, 17 years after the date of engagement, Inés Valestena de Pérez first learned about his infidelity. Standing on the street, with a glass of wine in his hands, the Lord remembered the girl's words. Just look at her clothes. Your bride dresses like a nun. You won't believe how arrogantly she acts in front of other noble ladies. If only you knew, Lord Carcel. All his thoughts were occupied by these words. Getting into the carriage and closing the door, he drove away, looking out the window, thinking. So she heard everything. For some time, he silently looked at one point, thinking about his own, until he arrived at the residence of Duke Valestan. Entering the room, he thought, once married, a man should not allow any woman to approach him except his wife. But I've already had so many women. Don't I care now? The model of family life in high society, when infidelity was not condemned, has long been outdated. Behind him, the maids discussed him and admired him while he thought. Adultery is prohibited even after death. In that case, I should have a lot of fun before the wedding. The Lord walked forward, looking ahead. His thoughts consumed him. At least since I'm destined to spend the rest of my life as a monk, I won't have any regrets. All my self-indulgence will soon be left behind. I do not have any other choice. He abruptly burst into the room where a girl with dark blue hair and a black dress was waiting for him, looking forward. Hearing someone enter, she silently nodded her head slightly, inviting the guest to enter. The girl greeted in the most formal tone possible. Lord Carcel. Her face showed no signs of emotion. The man returned the greeting. Inés. The excited servant left, closing the door behind him with a creak. She looked at her groom emotionlessly as she spoke. I guess you had a reason to see me. Her calmness always bothered him. He replied, Right. In fact, I wanted to meet not only yesterday, but also 3 days ago, as well as 2 weeks ago. With a creak, she rose from her chair, closing her eyes and speaking. It's pouring like buckets here. I didn't want this to become a problem for you. Her behavior did not foretell trouble, but it was her calmness that frightened the man so much. Frowning, he thought angrily. An expected reaction after the price that appeared in front of her, but she had never ignored me like this before. He answered her out loud. That day, I understand how you felt. At the same time, he conducted a dialogue both with the bride and with his own thoughts. He thought, But whose fault is it that I must lead the life of a monk for the rest of my days? Inés said. I don't quite understand what you are trying to say, Lord Carcel. He immediately told her. You know perfectly well what I mean. The girl answered hastily. No, not at all, the excited man thought. She changed my life with just the flick of a finger. It would be hard to call this woman submissive. They looked at each other in silence while the Lord thought. But Inés Valestena loves me. She chose me out of love, giving up her highest title and legal right to marry into the imperial family. She had plenty of opportunities to fix everything, but she missed them all. 17 years ago or now. It doesn't matter. She was waiting for me out of love, still in the same place. But this has always been a problem. Inés loved me, but I didn't love her one bit, which is why I was constantly tormented by guilt. Closing his eyes and placing his hand on his side, he said calmly, I can explain everything.
The girl, who folded her hands in front of her, also answered, I saw you with my own eyes. That's enough. If I understood everything correctly, then it's okay.
Carcel did not quite understand the meaning of this phrase. She felt nothing. He asked, Are you seriously? She just answered, Lord Carcel, but he immediately interrupted her excitedly. I understand how frustrating this must have been for you. At least yell at me. Expressing neither anger nor jealousy, Inez calmly answered, But I'm not upset at all. This phrase amazed the man even more. He was in such shock that he himself began to persuade her. Of course you are upset. The girl rustled her dress, moving towards the tea table, speaking. No, I'm telling you. The Lord was confused as he said, But you refused to see me for 2 whole weeks, she answered. It's because of the rain. I didn't want you to get wet on the way here. Stopping, the girl turned slightly and closed her eyes, and then continued. I'll be honest, I find this kind of bickering very tiresome, Lord Carcel. You and I are not close enough to have this kind of dialogue, are we? Then her words stabbed a knife into the man's heart. And now we are not talking about 1 or 2 women with whom you had an affair. Do you think I don't know anything? He found himself in a stupor, not understanding anything. New questions kept popping up in my head, but he only asked, And you're not angry? With a slight note of surprise, Inez asked, Should I? You are free to be with whomever you want. The man grabbed his head, clarifying, But I'm your fiancé. We'll get married soon. The girl talked to him as if they hardly knew each other. She said, This doesn't mean you should lose your freedom right now. Moreover, we are not married yet. Carcel could not read literally anything in the bride's eyes. Looking into his eyes, she said, So do what you want. The man was taken aback, speaking uncertainly. This is not funny at all, Inez. Lowering her head and placing her hand on her chest, she answered, I know. Like you said, I'm not saying all this because I'm so understanding. With every word she said, the man's heart began to beat stronger and faster, drowning out all other sounds. Inez spoke quietly. I don't limit your actions, because I don't care about you. It was a knockout. Now he's the expression on her face as she added, Do you understand, Escalante? He thought. That summer I turned 23. Then she told me that everything I believed was a lie. His world was turned upside down. Once at a gala reception, little Carcel asked the adults, I ask, life is how many years? All the nobles began to laugh at such an unusual question from the little boy. Laughter echoed throughout the hall. The boy thought irritably, Why is everyone laughing? God! Suddenly he heard the voice of a girl behind him. Do you even know what this word means? Young Inez approached him, speaking. No, am I right? At first he looked at her in surprise, and then he broke into a nervous, stuttering cry. I know. Of course I know. Everybody knows. She chuckled in surprise and then said, Then explain it to me. The boy became even more agitated, trying to find words. Uncertainly, the guy began to mumble, This is such a time. And this is the time. He didn't know what to answer. At the same time, the girl ran sharply towards her father, speaking. Should I really talk to this Lord Carcel? Duke Leonel Valestina tried to explain to his daughter as clearly as possible. Inez, you are much smarter than your peers, and you know it very well. He tried to carefully choose his words to set her on the right path. He began his moralizing. It's normal to feel disappointed. That's why you shouldn't ignore him, even if he's not as smart as you. If your friend doesn't know something, you should generously teach him, and not make him feel stupid, even if he is not very smart. Carcel immediately became angry after thinking about it. They think I'm dumb. The girl felt a failure as she spoke. But you don't need friends. Besides, Lord Carcel is my fiancé, not my friend. She looked with wide eyes at her father, waiting for an answer. Leonel sighed as he answered, Right, that's why you should be even kinder to him. Ah, just like a sweet young lady, she answered in a calm voice. I may have a bad temper, but I'm already a lady, father. Then the father stole a glance at the guests, speaking awkwardly. My baby should always have the last word. The girl turned sharply, looking at the guy with a surprised look. Carcel shuddered, waiting to see what would happen next. She walked up to the guy, speaking arrogantly. Escalante, listen carefully. Only a dead person can tell you how long life is. He asked in surprise. Can the dead talk? The answer was immediately heard. No. That's why no one alive knows the answer. The child, due to his limited knowledge, asked. Then, how does a dead man know? The girl answered without irritation. Because he went through death. Carcel still didn't understand anything. He learned of the death about 4 months ago. Hoping to learn more, he asked a question. So I have to die to find out? The girl calmly answered him. Life is the time you have until you die, so when you die it ends. Closing her eyes, she said, sighing. If it bothers you that much, I think you can do the math and find out how long your life will be. At that same second, the guy's heart began to beat very quickly, listening to the words of the young lady. In a panic, the boy spoke. How would I die? My grandfather's leg began to decompose after he was shot in Nunye. Does this mean I will lose my leg too? Will I have to live with you until she is cut off? The girl said emotionlessly. Your grandfather lived more than 10 years since he lost his leg, so you're saying that I really have to cut it off. At these words, the guy began to cry as he spoke. And if not, then I must marry you. Inez spoke calmly. We will not only have to get married, we will have to make a child. Carcel answered loudly, sobbing. Don't want. Passing guests paid attention to them as they spoke. God, what's happening? The boy was all red, and his eyes were wet with tears. He listened to what the girl said. The truth is that this may not last a lifetime. He asked in surprise. What? Smiling, she answered. I'm talking about our marriage. Suddenly, a loud voice sounded not far from the children. Now let's raise our glasses, for Carcel Escalante de Apoza and Inés Valestena de Perez, who will marry upon reaching adulthood. The woman continued her toast. Listen, Your Majesty. Inés Valestena will become the lady of the Escalante family, and Carcel, in turn, will be the son-in-law for the Valestena family. And to the delight of the imperial family, they will devote themselves to each other's families for the rest of their lives. Everyone raised their glasses, cheering and cheering in support of the toast. Carcel thought about it. I'm pretty sure it all started with that damn toast. It was from that day that my life began to fall apart. Some time later, Oscar Wellesa de Ortega, Crown Prince and cousin of Carcel, spoke. I still can't understand. Why do you? Did you hear what I just said? The red-haired boy looked at his worried brother. Carcel answered briefly. I don't know myself. The prince immediately said. Well, then strain your brains and try to understand. When I grow up and become an emperor, will you also stare at me like an idiot in response to my question? He also added, You must have done something to Lady Valestina. I'm sure so. It's because of your damn face, right? The blond boy replied. I'm only 6, Your Highness. However, this answer did not suit the prince. Oscar said to his brother with a displeased face. That's it. How dare a 6-year-old brat be so cunning? Carcel answered in a calm voice. I'll be 7 soon. The prince immediately said. Okay, some 7-year-old boy dared. The blonde answered immediately. You yourself are only 10 years old. Oscar asked in a smug tone. You didn't know she was mine? Lowering his head, Carcel answered. Inez never belonged to you. The prince said with a hint of anger. Do you dare to steal your master's property? However, after calming down, he spoke more calmly. I will not punish you, since you are the son of my uncle, but it was assumed that our alliance would be concluded for the benefit of the imperial family. While the prince spoke, his gaze did not leave his brother. When Inez refused the proposal of the crown prince and chose Carcel instead, it was Empress Cayetana who brought Carcel to the girl, as if she had been waiting for this. She never asked Inez why she abruptly refused the emperor's son. On the contrary, in her letters, she kindly urged Inez to make her own choice. She was supposed to maintain an alliance with the House of Valestin, but she was definitely not impressed by this gloomy girl. The empress needed Inez, but did not believe that she was worthy of her son. Sighing heavily, the young prince said, She turned me down and chose an idiot like you. brainless crow. He immediately heard Carcel's comment. I thought you liked Inez. Oscar looked at him with surprise and inflated ego. Laughing, Oscar asked, To me? This crow? Carcel said with surprise and incomprehension. You wanted her so much. This amused the prince, who said, Wanting and feeling sympathy are two different things, Carcel. There was a mania of celebration in his gaze. He continued, I want to marry Inez, but that doesn't mean I love her. It just so happens that her bloodline is best suited for marriage. The younger rat listened with surprise to the words of the older one. There was a creak of a chair. Oscar stood up, smiling at Carcel. Anyway, let's go visit your crow bride. There's still a lot of time before you grow up. The younger man did not understand the last significant phrase, but listened to the prince. Sometime later, two guys stood in front of the girl, one of whom smiled smugly, and the second stood with an aloof look. Inez looked at them without much enthusiasm, with a hint of dissatisfaction. Carcel glared at the prince, thinking, He's clearly not welcome here. In fact, it looks like she hates him with all her heart. Suddenly, Oscar turned and glared at his brother. He could immediately sense what his brother was thinking. Carcel shuddered, thinking, and he definitely knows how to capture negative energy, although I don't think I said anything out loud. Suddenly, Inez took the floor. As usual, it is customary to notify about a visit at least a week in advance. She spoke calmly. However, it seems that for some reason, Your Highness considered a visit to our estate such an unusual convenience that they ignored proper etiquette, and in the end, we were unable to receive you properly. At the end, she added, I don't know how to express my deepest regrets. The translation of her words had a completely different meaning. Your stupidity makes me look rude. The prince answered immediately, Why are you apologizing? There's no point between us. The girl immediately said, I was not ready for your visit, and my parents are absent at the moment, which makes me somewhat embarrassed. What did it mean? My parents aren't even home, so why did you show up and now get on my nerves? Oscar answered, There is no need to prepare anything. I didn't come to see the Duke or Duchess. I'm here to meet you. Carcel thought nervously. He won't even catch up with what she's talking about. Inez said, looking at the prince, I just believe that the meeting would have gone much better if I had been more prepared for it. She meant that this is not the best time, the blonde guy thought. How can you ignore Inez's words so much? Oscar decided to change the subject. I wanted to talk about the book you provided, The Life of Don Juan by Andres Gonzalo. A few days ago, I read it again. The girl only answered briefly. It's clear, and I picked up this book myself. The prince immediately began to talk. It has so many memorable lines that I couldn't help but reread it. My love of books is a serious problem. At this rate, there will be no time left to learn how to manage an empire. Looking at the cover, Inez just said, Perhaps I shouldn't have recommended this book to you after all. But he smiled and babbled sweetly. What nonsense! It is always a pleasure to discuss these meaningful topics with you. Sparkling, the crown prince decided to impress the girl with his beautiful words. After all, the existence of intellectuals cannot seem to be so lonely. You always have to put up with the ignorance of the masses. Carcel looked at his cousin in shock, mentally asking, What is he even talking about? This is truly funny. But the prince continued, That's why every time I see you, I feel like I can finally breathe. Oscar looked at his brother and said, Most likely, your young naive groom has not yet had time to know the pain experienced by people like us. Inez, clutching the book to her chest, looked at the groom and asked, So you've been here all this time? Turning his head back to the girl, the prince continued to speak. It will be hard for you to meet someone of equal intelligence other than me, so why take the risk? She silently listened to his every word, without expressing any emotion. With his hand on his side, the crown prince said solemnly, Inez Valestena de Perez, I give you the chance to make the right decision. In the name of the Ortega imperial family, I ask you to marry me. After which there was a silent pause. Without ranting, Inez rapped out, I do not like you. From such words, Oscar froze, not knowing what to do or what to answer. She repeated again, Don't like it, Your Highness, so I'm telling you no. The younger brother noticed how his brother clenched his hands into fists, Trying not to lose his temper and keep his mind clear, he somehow squeezed it out of himself. What is the reason? The younger one looked away, but immediately heard from Inez. Carcel, come here. Hearing his name, the boy shuddered. Clutching the book to herself, Inez turned to him again. You are my fiancé, so why don't you protect me? The prince immediately answered angrily instead of his brother. Don't bring the idiot into this, Inez said in a calm tone. Carcel, the crown prince is making me uncomfortable. However, Oscar answered again. This has nothing to do with children. Negotiations are conducted by adults. Grabbing his head, the younger one said, Lady Inez is 6 years old. The elder brother immediately quipped. Do you think Inez is anything like you? Carcel thought nervously. What are you getting attached to? He gave an idea of the difference between wanting and liking, but it seems that my big and important cousin really likes Inez. Suddenly, the girl rushed past the prince and stood behind the groom. Carcel turned around awkwardly, looking at her, and a gloomy aura reigned around Oscar. He glared at the younger one with a terrifying gaze and said, So what kind of game are you playing? The brothers looked at each other. Carcel answered him hesitantly. And I didn't start anything. But the prince had a different opinion, saying, Do you really intend to disrespect the crown prince? I told you not to mind your own business, Carcel. Next, he turned to the girl. Inez, I know that's not what you meant. I understand that you probably find yourself unworthy. I will rule this empire one day, after all. She interrupted him by saying, I've heard enough. Just tell him no. In desperation, Oscar again made another attempt to convince the girl to marry him. But, Inez, all I need is for you to give me wings. Together, you and I will rule Ortega. However, it seemed like she wasn't even listening to him. Turning her head, she looked towards the groom as she spoke. Carcel, what are you doing? All this gave me a terrible headache. Carcel? However, the guy stood there, lost in thought. How much longer will I suffer like this? How much longer will I have to get between them? Lost in his thoughts, he heard a girl's voice behind him speaking to him. Remember, you're just a 6-year-old boy. You don't have a master yet. These words brought the guy back to reality. He grabbed the bride's hand and they ran away. The prince shouted angrily, Carcel! After running some distance, they stopped. Inez turned to the groom. I'm fine. You can let go of my hand. He in turn asked, Has your headache gone? She pulled her hand away in response. It was an obvious lie. The boy immediately became nervous and asked, Are you not afraid of death? How could you lie to the crown prince? Sighing pompously, the girl answered, The imperial family would never disgrace themselves by reprimanding the House of Valestin on such an occasion. Besides, it was your cousin who was harassing me. Carcel looked at the girl, thinking, And why on earth would he like a girl like her? She's a rude woman, and she doesn't look particularly good. But maybe she's a little sweet. Where did it take me? No, even if I'm cute, I'm too good for her. While he was thinking, Inez asked a maid named Bella to bring her water. A little later, the girl turned to the groom. Escalante, wash your hands. He approached her, and she began to wipe his hands with a damp towel. Her fingers slowly rubbed the guy's hands, and he, realizing what was happening, immediately blushed, thinking nervously, The girl is touching my hands. And he barely said it out loud. Wait. For a boy like him, such contact was new. 3 minutes later, the guy's embarrassment disappeared. Inez silently continued to wipe his hands, and the guy thought irritably, Treats me like I'm a fool. She seems to consider herself much older than him. After a long pause, the girl spoke. What's wrong with you, Escalante? The guy answered awkwardly, You didn't call me Escalante before. She immediately turned her head in his direction and said, Would you like me to address you by your first name? I thought you hated me, Carcel answered quietly. This is wrong. Inez objected. But you kept crying because you didn't want to marry me. A loud scream rang out throughout the hall. I didn't cry. But the girl stood her ground, and here he was crying. She continued in a calm tone. And they roared again when I said that we would have to live together until death do us part. And you also cried after I said that I would have to have a child. It was hard for him to listen to such statements addressed to him, even though he was just a child. Grabbing his face, he said desperately, "Valestina, stop it, please." And suddenly she answered, "Okay, I will call you by name, Karshal." The guy removed his hands from his face and blushed, thinking, "And why was I so embarrassed? In my entire life, I have never had anyone who treated me like that. You, and only you, are the only one who does this to me." She extended her hand to him and said, "So come here." Then he told the girl directly, "You're strange, Inez," she asked without surprise. "I?" He continued his thought. "They say you like me, but if it were true, you wouldn't behave like that with me." He was embarrassed by the behavior of a 6-year-old girl. After thinking, she asked again, "Do you find it strange that I like you?" Frowning, he answered the question with a question. "Do you like me?" The answer was quite logical. "Otherwise, I would not have decided to marry you." However, this answer did not suit him, and then he said, "They say you just don't understand that marrying the crown prince is the greatest honor, that you chose me only because of my pretty face." Without raising an eyebrow, she answered, "This is true. I chose you because of your face." Karcel was speechless as he asked, "Do you really like it?" Inez carefully studied the groom's face while answering, "Is there anyone in this world who doesn't like everything cute?" "Yes. It can be used." He thought sadly, "So what is your opinion about people?" And he said it out loud. "You say that you like me, but you yourself are so rude. Don't you want to impress me?" This girl's behavior was too difficult for the boy. For a second, surprise appeared in Inez's eyes. Looking into Karcel's eyes, she grew together. "What am I missing that I need to impress you with?" Clenching his hands into fists, the guy began to speak. "If you want to be liked, at least you can." However, Inez immediately interrupted the boy, saying in a cold tone, "You are wrong. You don't have to like me at all. I don't need this. Karcel Escalante, all you need to remember is that I like you very, very much." The adult Karcel was sitting on a sofa in the residence of the Valestina family in Inez's room. The phrase stuck in the man's head did not give him life. "I'm not interested in you, Escalante." This was what Inez told him the last time they met. The man sat and thought silently. Right. That's when I realized that something was wrong here. Not interested? Have her feelings towards me changed? She was always quite modest, and therefore if she expressed affection, it was through letters. He began to look around the room, thinking, all high society has long been aware of her devotion. Even this room remains the same. Over the years, absolutely nothing has changed. A vague feeling of uneasiness haunted him. He narrowed his eyes and began to reason. There is something here, I am convinced of it. Something that could explain the change in her feelings. Evidence, if you will. He really wanted to understand Inez's thoughts and motives. Thoughts overwhelmed him again. Is it because she feels awkward because our bodies have changed? Or did it all happen before I entered the military academy? No. Even when Inez gets dirty looks, she always does. Suddenly, he was brought out of his thoughts by a girl's voice. What are you doing here? Escalante. Inez, with her hair done and in a black dress, looked at her guest with an empty gaze that did not express the slightest joy of meeting. The man looked at her carefully, thinking, at least she stopped calling me Lord, as she did last time. But something in this room has clearly changed. Even this shapeless funeral dress can't hide the fact that the maturity her body has acquired is simply beautiful. Having not received an answer, the girl went to the basin to wash her hands, looking at the man at the same time, thinking, he seems to be thinking about all sorts of obscenities again, pretending to be lost in thought. But he thought about her. That will be my only pleasure as a married man. Then Karcel raised his head and asked without further ado, Why aren't you interested in me? Sighing heavily, she turned away from him, answering, There's no hidden meaning here, so don't bother. The Lord immediately hurried to say, Not the best answer. Inez spoke, I only gave it to make you feel better. I said that I knew everything about your personal adventures, that you did not need to worry about me, and therefore you were free to do whatever you wanted. she added in a colder tone. What part of this was not clear to you? The man was taken aback, speaking immediately. Now everything is clear. I upset you, and that's why you spoke with sarcasm. This was the only reasonable conclusion. However, Inez has no idea what he is asking. Sarcasm? When is that? The Lord immediately said. Either that, or you said those words without actually meaning them that way. He confused the girl who asked, Did you say what? When was this? Then he snapped his finger, pointing it at the girl, and froze, asking, Or maybe you were worried about my feelings. Without showing any signs of emotion, the girl said, You understand that you are talking nonsense, right? He answered immediately, Yes. Rubbing her head and closing her eyes, Inez said tiredly, You act like I found myself another man or something like that. Frightened, Carcel asked with fear in his voice, Did you find it? Then that would explain a lot. He immediately heard the question. And is it important? Frozen, the man silently began to nod. Inez answered him, I am not a desired quiet person, just like your cousin once said. She remembered Oscar's phrase, Raven of the House of Valeston. The Lord immediately responded to this statement. The reason you don't have men hovering around you is because you already have an extremely attractive fiancé. However, he himself understood that these words were far from the truth. He remembered his bride, who at every social ball was dressed only in black. He thought, Inez always dresses like this, so it's no surprise that she remains in the shadows. In a sea of animated birds, she stands out like a crow. Gritting his teeth, the Lord thought, with such a body, she could conquer even the stupidest noblemen. But the truth is what it is. I can't just say that she's beautiful because of her body. It will sound like a pig. Then Inez spoke. Women are interested in you because my views are much less threatening than yours. I know this, and I don't care. I have no claims either to this marriage or to you. Looking down, he listened carefully. I don't see the point in spoiling our relationship because of such nonsense. Carcel spoke slowly. So you want to say that our relationship? She immediately interrupted him by saying, You are fit to be a husband. The man fell into a stupor. This phrase echoed in his head, refusing to die down. He asked himself, Am I fit for the role? He dared to say it out loud. Are you sure everything is okay with your mind there? His eyes were full of misunderstanding. Inez walked up to him and took hold of the chain, slowly playing with it as she spoke. I'm more than sane. I know very well what jealousy feels like. I also know how to get angry, and I can also know affection. Therefore, if you betray me, I will kill you. The guy swallowed, thinking, How did we jump to murder? And he asked out loud, Will you kill? She answered completely calmly, This is what I become when I fall in love with a man. And that's why I don't want to waste even a fraction of my energy on a man like you, on someone I don't even like. Not understanding anything, Carcel asked himself. What's going on here? He immediately turned to Inez, who hurried away. Inez, wait, I'm not finished yet. She answered immediately, and I don't want to hear anything else. The man grabbed her wrist. Holding her hand, he said, No, you need to hear this. Listen to me, Inez, she interrupted him by ripping out. I don't want to. He mentally asked himself, Why am I doing this? And he said it out loud. Damn it! Can you listen to me for at least a minute? It's not what you think. The girl suddenly pulled her hand away, and the man thought in shock. What's going on here? Why am I holding her wrist? And how did things get so dramatic? Inez burst into tears as she asked, What should I think then? How should I understand your relationship with that woman? Panic covered the man, who was conducting an internal monologue. My relationship with that woman? What really surprises me, though, is the look on Inez's face. It cannot be true. He answered her immediately. There is nothing to understand there. There is nothing between us. The man put his arm around her waist and pressed her to him, saying, You know that you are the only one who matters to me. He asked himself, Did I really say that? This is impossible. He hugged her even tighter. The girl blushed from tears. speaking in a trembling voice. "Do you think I'll fall for it? You are so—" She couldn't finish her sentence as she felt something down there. Trying to push away, they both, being in shock at the same time, realized what had happened. It was as if they were struck by lightning. Then the girl suddenly began to beat him in the chest, unable to escape from the embrace, screaming, "Let me go! How much longer are you going to insult me? You are disgusting, simply terrible." The guy thought, dumbfounded. What's happening? What does all of this mean? And the girl did not stop screaming. "You libertine! How dare you let go of your hands?" "Frozen," Carcel mumbled. Inez." And I thought to myself, and this hurts. Inez burst into tears even more, screaming, "Get away from me! Let go! Don't you dare say my name with those dirty lips. You are like a lustful male dog during the rut." Looking at her behavior, Lord Pudum, "It cannot be true," the man immediately told her, trying to calm her down. "My body wouldn't react this way if there was someone else in my arms." "You are the only one who evokes such a reaction in me," he thought. Nuno stopped this. Then, pulling her closer to him, he said, "You're the only one who gives me a hard time." They froze, realizing how stupid Carcel had just said. He immediately scolded himself. "You crazy bastard." But suddenly the girl began to unravel her hair while speaking. "You say you'll let me go if I trust you, right? Then prove that I can do it." Pulling the knot, Inez's dress began to fall off her shoulders. Carcel blushed as he listened to the girl. "Show me how much you want me, Carcel." He swallowed, asking quietly, "Why don't you have anything under your clothes?" She slightly exposed her breast to him, saying, "And I never wear underwear when I go to a meeting with you, each time hoping that one day you will take me into your arms and get to know my body better." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spoke. "I've been waiting for this for so long," the blushing man thought. "This is definitely a dream. Just a harmless dream, without suffering and sadness. Just a dream in which Inez is naked. And that's why I never want to wake up from this dream." She said his name, Carcel. Then he opened his eyes and saw a young guy above him, screaming in a pleading tone, "Carcel, wake up! You promised to spar with me this morning." The guy purposefully tried to reach him. The Lord, in turn, froze with wide eyes, trying to compare the facts of reality and dreams. He had not yet moved away from the range of emotions that he had literally just experienced. He said with a hint of despair, "Damn it." Sitting in the bathroom, he remembered Inez's speech. "I don't want to waste even a fraction of my energy on a man like you, someone I don't even like." These were the words that stuck deep in his head. He reasoned, "That's right, I can live the way I want. Now I can do whatever I want without fear." He put his hand to his head, thinking, "Why? Because my fiancé doesn't care one bit." He remembered the morning incident when he kicked out the one who woke him up and became lost in thought. Come to think of it, today's incident was also her fault. Raising his hand sharply, Carcel said out loud with displeasure, "Actually, I'm glad she's not interested in me." Looking at the ceiling, he said, "Yes, I am the happiest person in the world." He tried to silently relax in the bathroom. A short time later, Carcel stood with a gun, looking down. Suddenly he heard the voice of his comrade. "Captain, do you know that you have been repeating the same words ever since you arrived?" The man turned his head to his side, asking, "Really?" The smiling man with sideburns answered, "You mention your betrothed, Lady Inez." "They just said I'm so happy." Carcel immediately said, "When the boss speaks, your task is to listen silently," his friend said. "I've just never heard you talk so much, Captain." Nothing bothered him, and he continued, "You must have been pleased with what she told you." Suddenly a shot rang out, and a bullet flew near his ear, interrupting his joyful speech. Turning his head, the comrade discovered a bird shot by the captain. Looking into the face of the frightened man, Carcel asked, "You don't even know how to shoot correctly, and you're already criticizing me?" The men immediately screamed, "I'm sorry. That's not what I meant, sir." Smiling awkwardly, he continued, "In fact, I envy you. That is, this is the dream of every man." The Lord asked, What is this? The answer came right away. A wife who does not constrain her husband. They continued to wander along the road. Walking with guns in their hands, they had a conversation. Carcel answered, "She is not my wife yet." However, his companion did not retreat. "You know that soon I will also get engaged?" When a man gets married, he is forced to live under the constant supervision of his wife. We cease to be free. The captain turned his head menacingly and begged, "So, what are you going to do after getting married if you are already worried about your freedom? Do you really think that I'm as much of a scumbag as you?" Taken aback, the man answered, "No, what are you talking about? That's not what I meant at all." He immediately hastened to calm the Lord. "I just said that you are lucky to have such a caring and kind lady as your bride, who is ready to give her husband the opportunity to live the way he wants." Carcel thought about his words. After a pause, the captain answered, "This woman shows no concern for me. She doesn't really care about me. That's why she'll be fine no matter what I do." Carcel lowered his head sadly. Late in the evening, the girl asked, "And this time you have quite a long vacation, Captain." Carcel asked, "Does this bother you?" She answered immediately, "Of course not. I'm excited to be able to watch you all summer." She looked at his lips with scarlet eyes and spoke. "God, how did the Almighty make you so perfect? A beautiful face and such a strong, perfect body. I really envy your fiancé. Only you can turn me on like that." After this phrase, the Lord froze, pausing. After thinking, he emerged from the beauty's embrace, speaking. "My lady, I ask you to step away from me," she asked in surprise. "I just can't believe it. How can you do this to me? Tonight you must be mine." He began to leave, throwing in the last thing. "I'm sorry." Was she shouting after him, Lord Carcel? "Captain Escalante, do you want to excite me even more? You really are perfect. I'll wait for you here." At first she cried, and then she rejoiced. However, the man thought in a panic, "This is some kind of nonsense. Aren't those speeches just nonsense, blurted out by me in a dream? Well, no, that stupid dream shouldn't have had any meaning. Words spoken in a dream have no power over me." He was overcome by fear and misunderstanding. While the girl with whom he was supposed to spend the night looked after him in admiration, the Lord thought desperately, "So why? Why is this happening? Why can't I get it up?" Carcel sat in the theater and reasoned. "After the wedding, I will no longer have any options other than Inez Valestena. Therefore, I cannot lose the opportunity to do this. Nothing other than some kind of curse. Or maybe it's just a temporary problem. That is how it is." He clasped his hands and began to sweat. His thoughts cut him without a knife. "The chances are 0 that I would be registered as impotent at such and such an age. No, just calm down. This is impossible. But ever since that night, every time I think about Inez." As soon as he introduced his bride, his body immediately reacted. Resting his head in his hands, he thought, "Well, of course. And I'm not impotent at all. Simple problem. Well, a very serious problem," he tried to convince himself. The man looked at one point and thought, "Everything is fine. Inez won't come today anyway, so it's as simple as that." A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "I apologize for being late." Raising his head, he recognized his bride. Looking into his eyes, she said, "I planned to arrive on time, but by accident." He immediately interrupted her, asking in shock, "Why are you here?" The people who were sitting in the hall immediately turned and began to whisper when they saw Inez. The girl sat down next to him while Carcel spoke. "You practically don't show up at such events, even despite invitations." She answered immediately, "But I knew that you would show up." She then ran her index finger along his cheek. He immediately tensed up, thinking. She touched my cheek with her bare hand. Inez immediately commented on this. "Lord Carcel, I ask you not to make such an expression on your face in public, which is devoid of any nobility." Looking ahead, the man said, "And who is to blame for what I look like?" "Forget it." There was an awkward pause. He stole a glance at the girl, examining her body. She didn't pay attention to the looks from the outside. Suddenly, Inez raised her voice, which startled the Lord, causing him to flinch. I apologize for that incident. I'm not entirely sure I know why, but it seems like what happened has thrown you a little off track. Without looking at his bride, Carcel asked a question. Is that why you came today? You could have seen me at any other time. The girl answered immediately. I really didn't think that a separate occasion was required for a simple meeting. Also, despite the groom, the girl asked. Could it be that I upset you again? The man answered calmly. Are you saying that we are not close enough to look for excuses for this? He tried to maintain a casual appearance. After a moment's pause, the Lord continued. Your excessive politeness is of no use here. I find it both inconvenient and cause for concern. You make it seem like there's only one impolite person here, and that's me. Inez moved closer to him and whispered quietly. Why are you so irritable today? He looked down and saw her so close to him that he involuntarily panicked. His face immediately flushed red, and his heart began to beat wildly. Looking at him with a hint of excitement, the girl said, Lately you've been acting terribly strange. When she said the last words, the man came to his senses and only now realized that they were no longer in the theater, but were riding in a carriage. The Lord looked at the bride with confusion, grabbed the pillow and pressed it to him, and then awkwardly lowered his gaze and began to mumble. Nothing. Nothing at all. Inez thought. Is it just me, or is he crazy? With his eyes on the floor, Carcel thought in panic. Why am I behaving this way? I'm not some kind of pervert or teenager with raging hormones. Why are you doing this, Carcel? Has the roof completely gone? He squeezed the pillow tighter. Looking at his condition, Inez raised her voice. Well, how about we get out of the carriage now that we have come to our senses? Va, of course, will need to accompany me. The man looked up in confusion and asked, Have we arrived yet? He looked out the window in shock and said, Wait a minute, this is my house, Inez said with confusion. What's the matter? I told you we were heading to the Escalante residence. You weren't listening? The man, smiling, rubbed his head and answered, Exactly. The girl appraised him with her signature look as she spoke. Having to see me is not very pleasant for you, I understand. But if you continue to behave this way, it will turn into a problem for me too. It seems the bride misunderstood her groom's strange behavior. Carcel leaned over slightly and said guiltily, Inez, you are well aware that I do not find you annoying. At least, let's go out. The first to leave the carriage was the Lord, who offered his hand to the bride, which she immediately accepted to descend safely. Once on solid ground, Inez looked at her gentleman and took his arm. He was immediately pierced by a familiar sensation that arose at the most inopportune time. Heading towards the house, the man thought, This is torture. Well, very painful torture. At this time, all the servants and maids looked at the beautiful couple with admiration. Everyone immediately began to bow to them. The girl walked with a proud gait, while the Lord's legs gave way due to nerves. He walked home with a careless step, thinking, Damn you, Inez Valestena. Now it was harder for him than ever. Sitting in the living room of the Escalante residence, Inez looked around the spacious room, asking, Escalante, don't you think the space is too open for conversation? Carcel immediately said, Is this the reason we can't talk here? After thinking, the girl answered, No, but we have something personal to discuss. The Lord clinked his cup against the saucer and immediately said, This room is quite private. You can start talking. Raising his cup, he began to drink tea while listening to the bride. Looking at the groom, Inez began to speak in a calm tone. Last time you left in such a hurry that you couldn't finish the conversation there. The man immediately hurried to clarify, looking away. I didn't leave in a hurry. The girl continued, I appreciate the efforts you made to hide the truth from me. In particular, I'm talking about your attempts to keep your obscene lifestyle a secret. I know you did this out of respect for me. Without letting her finish, Carcel stood up and addressed the bride. I suppose I should keep my mouth shut, considering this is entirely my fault, but it seems like you really have a crush on me. He tried to smile sweetly. Crackling her neck, the girl was silent, waiting for the man to sit down again, and then continued. Just let me finish, Escalante. What I meant was that you don't have to worry about hiding who you're dating. I'm not interested in you. Her voice sounded as calm as possible, which the Lord did not really like. She continued, I also know that you are not interested in me either. For the rest of the engagement, we can just continue like this and not interfere in each other's personal lives." Every word she said made Carcel experience a new portion of shock. Inez spoke. "And then we will stick to it after the wedding. As long as no one openly disrespects another, we will indulge each other and not interfere in personal matters." Looking into her face, he asked, "Are you saying that we can do whatever we want in our personal time?" And I thought about it myself. Are you planning to do something behind my back? All the same, you will protect your sheep and feed the wolves, and therefore you allow me to do the same. Inez just nodded silently, confirming her words while enjoying her tea. Suddenly, Carcel stood up from the sofa, slowly walked around the table, and stood opposite the bride. She watched his actions in disbelief, trying to guess his intentions. He stood looming over her, when suddenly, without further ado, the man sat down on the table opposite the girl, silently looking at her with a serious expression on his face. Not understanding anything, the girl said with slight surprise. "Escalante." Looking at the interlocutor in front of her, Inez said, "People don't sit on tables, there are chairs for that," Carcel replied brazenly. "I doubt that I will turn into a toad if I sit on the table." Without reacting, the girl asked, "Are you 5 years old?" Then, putting on a serious face and lowering his gaze, the man said, "Before you call me a child, you should think about what nonsense you are talking about. It turns out that you staged this whole show for the sake of your lover?" However, Inez, unlike Carcel, was pure. The Lord leaned slightly towards her and continued, "Tell me, are you doing all this for the sake of meeting him?" He immediately thought about it. That would explain everything. He needed to get to the bottom of the truth. Carcel imagined the bride surrounded by men and began to think, why did she not give a damn about my actions? Why did she allow me to do whatever I wanted? And why did she go so far as to describe in detail how we would continue to live our lives in marriage? Who knows? Maybe it's not just one man, but several. I can't even imagine how many men she could seduce with her porcelain skin and voluptuous body. Considering her personality and the way she commands those around her, she would certainly be able to take control of anyone with just a few words. He thought desperately, "But after we get married?" Suddenly, he was pulled out of his thoughts by a girl's voice. "I don't have any man. Is it bad to want to make your life easier? That's the only reason I proposed an agreement." Inez looked at the groom without blinking as she spoke. "I just want you to be free. After all, your life has changed because of me. You became engaged to me, although you never wanted it. You had to become the heir to your house at such a young age, all because of me." The girl remembered her fiancé when he was 17 and said, "We were supposed to get married 6 years ago, but you entered the military academy just to postpone the wedding. You even served in the army." Looking away, she smiled slightly before continuing. "Although, to be honest, you did me a favor by doing this. It's not that I didn't like you, I was just glad that the wedding was postponed indefinitely." The man, frozen in shock, listened to the revelations of his bride. "I'm sure this means nothing to you," he thought dazedly. "Doesn't mean anything to me? Why does this sudden postponement of the wedding mean nothing to you? Wants to leave everything as it is just for my convenience?" He remembered himself in the army while listening to the girl. "You boarded a warship and went into battle, only to put off your life together with your nun-like fiancé," Carcel thought. No, that doesn't make sense. Not finding logic in her words, he thought about it. There must be some ulterior motive. Over the past 17 years, I have seen you from all sides. That's why I'm sure of this. Looking down, the man thought about the girl's words. However, Inez did not think about finishing, so I will make it up to you, making sure that after the wedding you become even freer than before. I will be your wife only in fact, and will lead my life separately from yours. Opening her eyes, the girl noticed how close to her the face of Carcel was now, who quietly asked, "Do you want to live a separate life from your husband's? Do you think this is possible?" He moved even closer and then kissed her. During the kiss, she squeezed his uniform in the chest area and her hands trembled. Then the man stopped and said, "Moving away. Didn't you say that we need to have children? But what about joint participation in the process of their conception?" Rising from the table, He turned over his teacup as he spoke. "I'm sorry to ruin your plans, Inez, but we won't live separately. You will have to kiss me hundreds of times, and our bodies will meet thousands of times." Inez looked at him in surprise as she listened to his speech. "I won't lay a finger on other women, and I will be with you when you give birth to your first child, and then when you give birth to the next." The girl didn't fully believe her ears. Carcel, plucking up courage, continued to speak. "And even if we don't make children, I will make sure that I satisfy you and arrange it so that you will satisfy me." Now he spoke sincerely. Then he leaned closer to the bride again and said, stroking her chin, "I don't need so-called freedom or privacy. My understanding of marriage excludes this. I may be a disgusting bastard, but I'm far more loyal than you think, Inez Valestena." However, the story of Inez Valestena, from her point of view, did not look so wonderful. Inez's first life ended when she was 26 years old. Life expectancy is known only to the dead. It was in this way that she learned the extent of her fleeting, insignificant life. The girl recalled this, looking at her corpse from the side. She knew the answer because she had died before, but the source of the knowledge she gained was not only death. In the end of her first life at 26 was the result of her own decisions, and no one else's. This happened a long time ago, but the feeling of hopelessness experienced then is still fresh in the girl's memory. She remembered being the last person to see the foolish expression on the prince's face, and she remembered the chaos that followed in 26. Then the prince looked at her in shock, panic, and fear. His expression was difficult to describe in 2 words. The one and only daughter of Duke Valestena gained status through her affiliation with the Grande de Ortega. She was born into one of the strongest families in the empire, and was a lady who took pleasure in extravagant jewelry. To satisfy his daughter's fine tastes, the Duke spared no expense, and this led to Inez becoming the undisputed leader in the field of fashion in the city of Mendoza. Literally all the ladies of the court admired her. At the time, noblewomen regularly applied an almost poisonous powder to their skin to make it look pale. But soon after Inez returned from a summer trip with bronze-colored skin, tanning gained popularity. Inez truly lived the high life. Magazines were busy every week glorifying the Crown Prince's bride for her dignity and class. She was loved by the Crown Prince and lived the life of a beautiful young princess. This was her peak of fame. At that time, Inez was so happy in her ideal life that she made an effort to make it even more ideal. Day after day, she tormented her dressmakers with demands to create new dresses for her. The girl studied countless invitations in order to decide which events would not only improve her reputation, but also allow her to become the center of attention. In pursuit of a slender waist, Inez often exhausted herself with hunger. She wanted people to believe that she was born thin and was naturally that way, so she put on an act by eating large portions of food every time she attended a formal dinner. But there was a catch. At the same time, it subsequently caused nausea until everything that was eaten came out. Did she live a normal life? Inez was not sure about this. It was then that doubts began to grow in her. She couldn't tell if it was all about becoming the ideal woman for the crown prince, or if she was simply using him to achieve the ideal life. But Inez really loved him, despite everything. She loved, even if only a few years had passed, and she fell for his vile lies, and the reasons for her love were rooted in her own vanity, and what she really loved was reputation and status. How could she love someone like him for even a split second? Inez experienced 4 miscarriages, and every time she lost a child, both the imperial family and the empress blamed her for this, openly carrying out attacks full of contempt. So she lived as a married woman for 10 years. Oscar never took her side and ignored her pleas for comfort. In fact, he even came to the conclusion that Inez was born with a cursed womb that could not produce a living child. Although her life seemed dazzling from the outside, inside she was dying. And after the wedding, it was very difficult to call her life normal. A normal life was simply impossible. The prince spent most of his time not with his wife. As a result, when Inez found out that her husband, not one iota spoiled, had contracted all possible diseases due to his dissolute lifestyle, and that this was the cause of the death of all 4 of her children, when she was tormented by memories of all those terrible nights when her vile hubby took her, pregnant, by force, ignoring attempts to refuse him solely in order to satisfy his own desire. He was the only man she'd ever known, and now her body was marred by the evidence of all the lewd nights he'd spent with other women. She had never done anything shameful in her life, and yet she was punished. For marrying a human likeness, a degenerate. But there was something worse than the diseases he suffered. His wish. He was well aware of his illnesses, but not once did he hesitate to satisfy himself anyway at the expense of his unassuming wife. He had nothing to do with his wife or the conception of an heir. He didn't even do it to annoy her. He simply did it without thinking. When she looked back on her life, she counted the 4 miscarriages as a blessing. If even one child had survived, sin would have been inevitable. The Crown Prince begged, "Inez, I beg, do not do that. You're out of your mind. And right now I'm not able to think straight." The girl answered immediately, "My mind has never been so clear." The fact that she had not given birth to a single living child was the only consolation in her miserable life. She told the prince, "You told me that no one in the Ortega family had ever gotten a divorce before?" He said that you cannot become the first loser in the imperial family. Pointing the barrel of the rifle under her chin, Inez said, "So now I'm going to make you a real loser. You will become the very first prince to drive his wife to suicide. I will kill myself because life with you disgusts me." Smiling, Inez spoke in an even voice. "I can't spend another minute, not even a single second, with someone like you." Then there was a click of a trigger, followed by a loud shot that sprinkled blood across the room. Under the prince's frightened gaze, she simply killed herself. No one could have come up with a more peaceful outcome. Her death did not harm a single soul, not even the crown prince, who was little better than a drain rat. If he suffered from anything, it was from Inez's will, in which she revealed all the details of his dirty adventures of a sexual nature. She did not expect to receive any compensation. She just hoped that if God existed, she would end up in a better place. And with that, she closed her eyes, determining for herself that even if it had been wrong, it would not have changed her decision. And therefore, waking up on the hunting grounds where she spent her childhood, Inez had no idea what had happened. While the girl was trying to understand what happened and how she ended up here, a young guy ran towards her from behind as fast as he could, screaming, "Inez!" Stopping next to her, he watched as she hit herself hard, falling to the ground. Even the birds scattered from her blow, and she herself fell under a tree. The guy with dark blue hair said, "My God, Inez, what has gotten into you?" Standing up slowly, she said, "It hurts so much. It's not a dream." He stood over her, making no attempt to help her get up. The girl repeated again, shedding a tear, "Of course this is not a dream. Anyway." Inez herself slowly rose to her feet, under the questioning gaze of the young man. A little later, Inez touched the same guy's cheek, thinking, "My God, you are still so young. I can't believe the great Luciano Valestena was a brat at 19. Her brother looked at the girl with excitement. She could not get over the shock as she lay in her bed. Luciano was speaking at this time. "Inez, you're doing it again. You're acting strange today. Perhaps you took your mother's medicine by mistake." The girl put her head back on the pillow. The maid spoke up. "My lord, perhaps Lady Inez is acting this way because of her upcoming wedding." The guy answered immediately, "I guess that's the only reason. But wasn't she the one who said that she couldn't wait for this event?" Inez looked at the maid, her eyes full of surprise, and said, "Juana, you are so young and beautiful. Lord, look at your skin. Are you just turning 17 this year?" These words made the maid a little embarrassed. Annoyed by the lack of understanding of what was happening, Luciano turned to his sister. "Stop it already. Inez, you sound like a perverted old man who lusts after young girls." Juana said the same. "I've been asking for this all day, but it seems my words are falling on deaf ears. My lady, please stop this." The girl looked at her brother and the maid, and she imagined the prince, thinking, "My whole life in Perez ended when I turned 16. The moment he threw the veil over my head, from now on I could not go back until the end of my days." She reasoned bitterly. Those who were dear to me, the beautiful garden where I played with Luciano, and that place at the top of the castle. All this has become just a memory. I had no idea how things were here, how people had changed, what I had left behind. Gripping the blanket tightly, Inez concluded, "But now, All this appeared before me again, as before. Now the events of her life are repeating themselves again, but she still does not have the courage to believe in what is happening. Looking out the window, she thought, I spent all of last spring here in Perez. This was 10 years ago. Looking around the room and her hands, Inez repeated it over and over again. It was spring then. It was still spring. Spring is not over yet. Luciano looked at her as he spoke. In 4 months you will marry the crown prince. In fact, in 2 weeks you'll be leaving for Mendoza. Everyone in Mendoza will find fault with you. The brother poured out this information without thinking. He continued talking regardless of the girl's feelings. He said what he thought. In the end, Prince Oscar is already too good for you. I understand that you feel pressure from what is happening, but... He didn't have time to finish. Inez grabbed him by the throat. In front of Juan, the girl threw her brother to the floor and asked with a maniacal look, Who? Who is too good for whom? Who do you think is too good for me? Gasping for breath, Luciano whispered, Inez, you've clearly lost your mind. A dull bang sounded. Clenching one hand into a fist, Inez began to hit her brother in the face. Juan screamed hysterically, My lady! Please stop! My lady! The girl stopped while the maid spoke. My lord, are you okay? We need to treat your wounds now. Inez froze, looking at one point, lost in thought. It all seems too true to be real. This is truly reality. At 26, life is already so hopeless. But I was naive at 16. When I dreamed of becoming Oscar's wife, the guy looked in fright at his younger sister, who was frozen and thinking, None of this is a dream. I went back to when I was 16 and only 4 months away from my wedding. This was before everything in my life fell apart. A tear rolled down her cheek. All her thoughts were busy. I was rewarded for my patience. What a blessing. This is a chance for me to kill myself properly before I go to heaven. At least then, I firmly believed in it. That was when I experienced death for the first time. Inez left the room. There was a mark on her cheek from the blow that she gave herself to check if it was a dream. Looking ahead, she thought, we were engaged at 10 years old, and the wedding was very close, because I know what reaction to expect. At that moment, Oscar was practically a saint, who boasted of his cold mind and sober mind. He was the crown prince who maintained his chastity so he could share it with his bride on their wedding night. The girl wiped away her tears, and then, looking away, Inez thought, Who will believe me if I say that in 2 years he will frequent brothels and become riddled with venereal diseases? She stepped forward with confidence. I thought, there is no need to waste this precious opportunity on a useless struggle. I don't want to marry Oscar again, she said out loud. And to achieve this, I need to become more cunning. 2 maids walked along the corridor and talked. Have you seen him before? I mean the portrait artist who visited the estate today. I think Our Lady is in love with him. She seems to be of age, doesn't she? And that man is extraordinarily handsome. How wonderful. At this time, Inez was sitting on top of the man. What happened to the woman who obediently agreed to such a worthy marriage and remained faithful to her husband? She felt that love could overshadow the marriage that had failed in her first life. And when true love burst into her life, she was overwhelmed by it in an instant. The long-haired guy lay underneath her, confused and breathing heavily. The girl put her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart. His voice trembled. Milady. And how did I even dare to lie under the Duke's daughter? Inez immediately interrupted him. Be quiet if you don't want to get caught. There was a short pause before the guy spoke again. You are so pretty. The girl listened carefully to the guy, looking into his eyes. From the moment I first saw you, I always knew that I would be helpless to stop falling in love with you. My name is Emiliano. Then tears began to fall from his eyes. The 16-year-old girl disappeared from Perez with him, and although they did not have a penny, they lived a happy life together for 4 years. However, one shot destroyed this life in front of Inez's eyes. With the child in her arms, she watched as Luciano shot him in the head with a pistol. She could only scream. Emiliano! Initially, Emiliano managed to escape for a while with the help of another person. But in the end, it all ended with him returning on his own 2 feet to die before her eyes. The cry of the child and mother echoed throughout the embankment. The embittered Luciano glared angrily at the man's corpse, after which he silently headed into the carriage. The Duke, sitting in his office, communicated with his son, speaking. Duke Valestin's daughter ran away with that poor man to return with the child. Just think, she was engaged to the crown prince. What a shame. Fortunately, the empress was so merciful. He then turned to his son, who stood still and listened attentively. You should keep a close eye on her, Luciano. We must make sure that her wedding to the Count of Almenara goes smoothly. The father's voice sounded firm and merciless. Inez stood in front of the office door, listening to a private conversation. At the end, the Duke added, "And as for that dirty brat she gave birth to, it would be great to get rid of him." Luciano's answer was immediately heard. "Certainly. I'll take care of it, father." Returning to her room and approaching the cradle, the girl saw a baby sleeping peacefully. She then extended her hands towards him as she spoke. "I don't want you to get hurt in an unfamiliar place." Then she sank to her knees in despair, not wanting to endure this torment. Sometimes one single name can change your world. A man, with a baby in his arms, walked into the light, speaking, "My name is Emiliano. Please don't forget me." With these words, he walked forward, carrying his child in his arms to a better life. He was the only color in her world, which consisted only of black and white. Emiliano, the one who changed her world, no longer existed in it. A bloody knife lay on the floor, and next to it was Inez's dead body. In her current life, Inez was sitting in her office and writing something, lost in thought. It was a perfectly thought-out plan. I even chose a handsome man for marriage so that he would cheat on me. All this was done in order to become the wife of the Duke of Escalante, who by chance does not live with him. The girl made a note according to Carcel's words. I may be a disgusting bastard, but what you think is more true, Inez Valestina. That's why I would never betray my own family. Having finished writing, she put down the pen. Sighing heavily, she looked at the wall and thought out loud. What the hell did I do wrong? What did you miss? What mistake did I make? I've been working on this plan for 17 years. It can't just fall apart like that. She took the pen again and pressed, releasing ink onto the paper, which immediately turned into a blot. She asked desperately, "Why are you betraying me? Carcel?" At this time, the man was walking along the road, and looking into the distance, he was thinking about something of his own. Sitting in front of the mistress, Juana asked, "So has this ladies' man finally decided to settle down? Yesterday he even sent a letter asking for your hand in marriage. What's the problem?" Closing her eyes in irritation, Inez answered, "In his desire to settle down." She sighed as she finished. "That's the problem." The maid who washed the lady's feet answered in surprise. "I don't quite understand your train of thought, but the lieutenant is perfect. He is guilty of being a womanizer, but he promised to work on his behavior. Isn't that nice?" Inez sat on the sofa, talking. "I've been told this 1,000 times already. I would like not to hear this from you either." "And there is already enough oil," Juana replied. "In your youth, you had tender feelings for the lieutenant. And now you don't even want to listen to me, and you only have a little oil on your feet." The girl immediately said displeasedly, "You know how much I hate oil on my feet," the surprised maid said. "This is my first time doing this for you. How was I to know?" And then Inez shuddered, realizing that she had blurted out too much. She then abruptly changed the subject as she spoke. "In any case, I like the current Escalante." Juana looked at her mistress with confusion, asking, "Is it possible that you enjoy watching him flirt with other women?" Inez answered awkwardly, "Perhaps I am." "Wait a minute. Don't look at me like that." Then the maid spoke. "But your fiancé says he doesn't need that. Perhaps he said a couple of phrases in order to appease you before the wedding." The maid carefully wiped the mistress's feet, continuing, "But still, he is a soldier, and therefore is unlikely to make such statements so easily." Inez found something to answer to this. "My naive Juana, everyone lies. Soldiers lie to their superiors all the time." The Duke's daughter decided to open the maid's eyes as she spoke. "Even the priests in whom you believe so much probably lie from time to time in order to look better in the eyes of God." Juana immediately screamed, George's father would never. She didn't have time to finish. Inez interrupted her as she spoke. But you're right about one thing. After all, Escalante only said this to please me. He simply weaved what he could. The maid immediately answered awkwardly. I put it a little differently. However, her mistress continued. You are Parva. He can never change. Yes, everything is exactly as you said. Can't a male dog suddenly become a man? I mean, if a dog says how tomorrow he will turn into a human, then will it really be so? Juana looked at the girl questioningly as she spoke. Lady Inez, you're talking to yourself. Suddenly, Inez lay down on the Lebanon, speaking. I'm not wrong, Juana, so my efforts will not be in vain. Coming close to the Lord, the man with sideburns whispered. I got all the information. Carcel was shocked, and then sharply pushed his subordinate away from him with a cry. Why do you always act so suspicious? With his hand on his face, the man began to answer. But, Lieutenant, the information is confidential. Anyway, no one is there. He stood nearby and saw Carcel's face, whose eyes opened wide from the short information he heard. The subordinate continued. She really doesn't have anyone. The lady is well known for her decency and chastity, which is why the cat told me that there was no way she could have a man. The Lord listened to every word. The man decided to report in full. Obviously, she spends a long time in the library alone, and therefore the owl believes that she would not even have time to acquire a lover. His animal informants strained the Lord a little, but he continued to listen. And according to the mouse, her position allows her to monitor all private visitors to the residence of the Valestena family, and she told. Perplexed, Carcel interrupted him by asking, Owl? What about the cat? The subordinate waved his hands, answering happily. Well, yes, in intelligence. You know, you can't go anywhere without secret names. Then the Lord clenched his teeth, thinking, I wonder who her man is. He imagined the girl with some guy, thinking, I just wanted to find out who he was, and, if possible, see him in person. You wear a mask of indifference, as if you won't shed a drop of blood if you get hurt. His thoughts were far from reality. But I'm interested. Have you ever shown a bright smile to another man? The voice of his subordinate immediately brought him back to reality. The lady's reputation is impeccable. From her behavior to her very way of being, she is simply perfect. Carcel immediately told him. You heard all this from people belonging to the Valestin family. When you want to investigate someone, you need to turn to various sources. Have you already done similar work? Smiling, the man with sideburns replied, This is my first time. You too, Lieutenant? Without saying anything, Carcel put his hand on his face, thinking, I just can't believe what I'm doing. He was simply confused in his actions. Lowering his head, he again fell into thought. I've never been so curious about a woman's past before. I already feel that I have committed almost the crime of the century by giving my naive subordinate the order to spy on her. He immediately introduced his subordinate, who was questioning the maids and at the same time thinking. Of course, as a result of this pathetic enterprise, my subordinate Jose received information much faster than I expected. Carcel sat in a chair, trying to think of something. As expected, there was nothing special about it. The answer he gives is so obvious, and yet Inez has no one. Why do I feel relieved? His thoughts were completely confused. Without thinking twice, he turned to Jose again. Is it possible that my fiancé is just incredibly meticulous? The man immediately said. I heard all the maids laughing at the idea. They say she sees men as gnats. Jose thought for a moment, and then continued. Don't you think that for a pair of silver servants they would give away all the secrets, if there was anything to tell? I asked around, but not a single person said anything that would cause concern. The man suffered. It seems that some of the women you have dated in the past have done their own testing on the lady, hoping to find her weak spot. Hearing this, Carcel immediately raised his head. Without interrupting him, he listened. For some reason, the maids seemed to be no stranger to answering questions like this. I can't imagine how often those ladies were questioned, since my investigation did not arouse any particular suspicion. Jose finished his assumptions, and there was silence. Carcel thought about it. Once upon a time she really had tender feelings for me. But Inez Valestina fell out of love with my very nature. Jose asked awkwardly, "Lieutenant?" But putting his hand to his head, the Lord began to think. I had no idea that something like this could be happening behind my back. These women were looking for flaws in my fiancé, whom I didn't even love. They planned to use everything they could find against her. He clenched his hand into a fist, thinking, "Who is to blame here if not yourself? Blame it on my face." But, alas, this will not happen again, Jose asked. "Lieutenant, you have already sent a letter to Duke Valestin asking for marriage. What would you do if you found her weak point now?" Looking at the chessboard, Carcel asked. "Weakness? Why should I look for him?" The subordinate responded in surprise. "I thought you were hoping to break off the engagement by finding something to use against her." Leaning against the table with a loud sound, the Lord said, "A promise is a promise, and we are talking about marriage, that is, about a promise between families. Why would having a man be considered a bad thing?" The man sighed heavily. At that very moment, Carcel began to think, "How absurd. I myself have been with countless women. It would be extremely unreasonable for me to say that I cannot marry because I suspect her of having affairs on the side." He remembered the time when they were children, thinking, "In addition, regardless of whether I want this marriage or not, from the age of 6 until now, I have never considered a life in which I would not be married to Inez." However, he answered briefly out loud, "I just want to know." Jose was surprised and then asked again, "By the way, when will you return to Kalstel?" The answer was also short, "After my wedding." Jose was taken aback by asking, "I'm sorry, what? When will you get married then?" Closing his eyes, Carcel answered, "Over the next 2 weeks. This was the longest vacation I could get this summer, including wedding leave. You will have to come back with me, so you better use all your vacation pay, including winter ones." 10 days before the wedding, Carcel arrived at the residence of the Valestin family. All family members gathered at the dinner table. The Duke and Duchess sat with cold, rude expressions on their faces, trying to control themselves. Luciano and Inez silently began to eat, gracefully handling the cutlery. Their faces were also cold, but less embittered than those of their parents. They only looked at their plate, not wanting to look up. Opposite them sat Carcel, beaming with the joy of this meeting. He tried to look as polite and friendly as possible in order to impress both the bride's parents and her older brother. The dinner passed in silence until the head of the family decided to break the silence by addressing Carcel. "So, I heard that you maintain a quiet lifestyle?" There was an aura of anger, rage, and power around the Duke. The Lord's neck instantly began to sweat, but he did not answer. The Duke continued, "Considering that your adventures are known throughout Mendoza, I mean that only the deaf have not heard about you, right, Luciano?" The eldest son answered briefly, "Perhaps." The father continued, "It's okay, son. After all, we are 4 men. I'm sure your little brother would say the same thing. Where would we be without male solidarity? A man is free to enjoy what he can, right?" Carcel became nervous as he spoke, smiling. "Not at all, your lordship." The Duke continued to press. "If not, then why did it?" The Lord replied, "I couldn't think clearly. The Duke was formidable. Is it because they didn't think at all?" The guy answered immediately. "I didn't think so, your grace," the Duke said. "All this time I believed that you were a simple traitor, but it seems that nature has deprived you of your brains." His words were more painful than any weapon according to the dignity of Carcel. However, he wasn't finished yet. If lack of virtue were considered talent, you would definitely become the greatest genius our empire could ever honor. Fine. So you want to tell me that a fool like you considers himself worthy of my daughter's hand? The head of the family gave him a death glare, but Carcel tried to withstand it by answering, "If I officially take your daughter as my wife, I will do everything not to disappoint you, your grace." Inez just ate in silence, listening to her father's discontent. "Now your existence alone is already disappointing me. Why don't you just play the game so I don't have that feeling anymore?" The Lord decided to interrupt him by saying, "Your grace, this is not much." But the Duke continued, "I've been watching you all evening, and it gives me incredible pain to see you breathing. I really want you to stop this." Suddenly, Inez entered the conversation, loudly slamming her hand on the table. "Father, that's enough. You invited him here yourself, so stop being so petty, I ask you. This is not appropriate." He immediately jumped up, asking, "Am I petty?" "Me." The man literally glowed with anger while the girl wiped her lips with a towel, answering, "Why are you asking if you already know the answer?" The father flared up. "I could easily." To crack his skull, but he didn't. The father's face showed anger as he shouted, "I even made changes to the plans in order to treat him properly. I believe that with this in mind, I was more than civilized, tolerant, and generous." The man could barely control himself so as not to attack the guest. Carcel turned pale at the Duke's behavior and therefore remained silent. However, Inez came to his defense and said, "Yes, we are tolerant to such an extent that we chose to raise this topic only now, although we were well aware of what was happening." "I'm fine, father." He screamed again. "Listen, I didn't do anything only because everything in this guy's behavior simply screamed that he had no intention of taking you as his wife." Inez answered calmly, "According to rumors, everything turned out that way, but in reality, we are getting married." "You also know this." Then the girl said, "So please leave my fiancé alone." There was silence. Carcel glanced towards the Duchess, who had been silent all this time, only drinking alcohol, a bottle of which was kept next to the servant on a tray. "Looking at her," the Lord thought in amazement. "I can't believe that in such and such a situation she drinks so much strong alcohol." Then Inez spoke again. "Looks like no one is eating much this evening. Am I the only one enjoying this meal?" Carcel's brother, who was also present as a guest, responded instantly, "Not at all. The dishes are very delicious." "Do you agree, Carcel?" His fiancé also inquired. "Lord Carcel, are you satisfied with everything?" He answered immediately, "Yes, everything is excellent." The head of the family again could not resist saying, "So you finally deigned to speak." During the entire evening, they did not say a single flattering word to their future wife. "I am amazed," Inez immediately asked. "How exactly should he flatter me, father?" The Duke said instantly. "He could say that today you are especially beautiful, that the dress pales in comparison with your beauty. You can't count all the possible compliments." Smiling awkwardly, Carcel said, "It goes without saying that Señorita Inez is very beautiful." The man immediately bared his teeth, looking at the Lord, answering, "Said the one who sold his body for a penny." Inez again intervened in the conversation. Lord Carcel was never for sale. Even if it were, it would clearly cost more than a penny. She continued, "Now is really a good time to discuss how much is his body worth?" The father looked at his daughter in shock as he answered, "You neglected my daughter until the years of her youth were gone, and now you come here with the intention of getting married before 2 weeks are up?" The Duke could not remain silent. "How would you like to understand this? Have you caught a venereal disease and are about to die? Did your father tell you to get an heir before you went to the next world?" Carcel was shocked by these words. Inez tried to calm him down. "Father, please stop." But there was no stopping him. He shouted, "You don't care about my daughter? Do you think it's okay to show disrespect if the only thing she cares about is your appearance?" Now a dark aura hovered around Inez, who, looking at her father, immediately jumped up, speaking, "Father, do you think this is how you should treat a guest?" Crossing his arms over his chest, the man responded angrily, "Guest? This bastard is a thief and nothing more." She walked up to her father and, placing her hands on his shoulders, said, "Lord Carcel is a respected lieutenant in the Imperial Navy, and, contrary to the claims you are trying to make, he did not sell the body and did not steal anything." Her speeches gradually calmed the man down. She continued, "Let's talk only about the facts, father. There are plenty of flaws in Lord Carcel that can be criticized without distorting the truth." Her calmness had a beneficial effect on the Duke's behavior. He answered her immediately, "Inez, you are kind beyond measure. Is it necessary to go through with this marriage when I protest so vehemently?" At the same time, Carcel was thinking, Duke Valestina had good reason. His daughter hasn't gotten any younger over the years. Sitting at the table, the Lord was lost in thought. Her fiancé had abandoned his wedding plans and sailed the seas, so his anger was expected. But I had no idea that her family would oppose our cancer so strongly. The fact that our engagement has not yet been broken is amazing. The Duke's question was heard. Why don't we hold off on getting married a little longer? And then it dawned on the Lord. Now I understand why the Duke never objected while I continued to find excuses for delaying the wedding. He wanted the engagement to be broken. Inez had long since passed the generally accepted marriageable age in Ortega, but since she bears the surname Valestena, there should be no problems in receiving marriage proposals from other worthy families. Inez's voice sounded in the dining room. Father, are you taking the agreement reached by our families too lightly? Not to mention the fact that neither Valestena nor Escalante can be called ordinary noble families. In Grandes de Ortega, we achieved recognition. Standing over her father, she spoke. This means that we do not judge anything lightly. She smiled, looking at the groom, and then said, And I'm fine. Is it true? For I love Lord Carcel. At this point, she put an end to her arguments. Carcel thought in shock. This engagement continues to this day, because while Inez may not like me or even have any interest in me, she at least wants me. Today I realized something else. Inez's smile is most beautiful when she is lying. Suddenly the slightly tipsy Duchess spoke up. You know, Lord Carcel, my opinion is very different from what the Duke stated. I liked you from the start. I also always told Inez that you were too good for her. However, at this time, the guy was annoyed, looking at how her brother interacted with his fiancée, thinking, why is Miguel walking so close to her? He was distracted by the Duchess's voice. Lord Carcel, are you listening? He answered immediately. Of course, Your Grace. Please continue. All the mother's attention was focused on her daughter, while at the same time she spoke. The truth is, I wanted a daughter different from Inez. All of her actions were disappointing. Of course, she wasn't always like this. At one time she was simply sweet and lovely. Carcel listened attentively to the Duchess's story. But one day she came down with a terrible fever, and after that she changed. Since then I've been disappointed in everything she does. Just look at her. Sounds like a witch. The Duchess asked a question. Do you really think you can handle living with her? Looking at his bride with an appraising gaze, Carcel began to think. I think she's quite beautiful. He didn't understand her mother's complaints about her appearance. The woman then hugged herself as she spoke. Again, I see that you seem intolerant of the very idea of this. After all, that's why you went to great lengths to postpone the wedding. Even the thought of sharing a bed with her must terrify you. She immediately twisted her face into an angry grimace as she spoke. Yes, her appearance alone makes everyone want to puke, the Lord thought. She is truly indignant. The Duchess continued, How will you survive the rest of your life in which you will have to stare at this creepy thing? Woman? Her words sounded desperate. I beg you, Lord Carcel, please fix it. You are required. She is suffering from illness. It's simply unbearable. It feels like she spends her entire day trying to confuse me. The Lord thought about it. If this is a common complaint about a disappointing daughter, is she going overboard? Then the woman said, I think that's when she exchanged souls with someone. Sometimes she did pure evil, as if she had been possessed by a demon. The guy froze in shock, listening carefully. In her youth, she sometimes threatened me or even engaged in self-harm. The only reason is to show that he will not listen to me in anything, Carcel asked with fear in his voice. Did she threaten you? The Duchess remembers that day with fear, telling, I offered to make her look beautiful, that's all. Then, without any reason, her behavior changed radically, and she began to ignore me. Her voice trembled. Then I decided to teach her a lesson, leaving no other choice. She even forced me to change into better clothes. But I did this only for her own good. Her last hope was only Carcel. She watched her daughter, and now she told the Lord. Take even today. You saw her behavior at dinner? There was a wedding in a week, and she filled her stomach with everything she could find. Carcel looked at the Duchess dumbfounded, listening carefully to her every word. What kind of noblewoman would behave like that? I swear she looks like an animal with its head in a feeding trough. The mother, like the father, was at the limit. She desperately tried to reach the Lord. You can't say that she wears makeup, and you yourself have seen how she dresses. You should at least skip some meals to maintain your figure. After all, this is her only advantage. The guy thought in shock. I can't believe my ears. But the Duchess continued. A mother should help her daughter so that she is loved by her husband and does not do anything that could tarnish her reputation. But that day, she looked at me with such anger. Remembering her little daughter holding scissors to her throat, the woman spoke. From that moment on, my daughter's fate was beyond my control. Out of fear for my own life, I could do absolutely nothing to help her. Looking at Carcel, she said, and therefore I entrust its correction into your hands, Lord Carcel. She's really very sick. But he answered with a serious look. I have no right to correct your daughter, the woman answered. But you will soon become her husband, her master. Looking down, still in shock from the Duchess's story, the guy said, Only my husband and no one else, and from now on I will only go to bed with your daughter. The Lord spoke these words with confident determination. Suddenly the woman laughed, which attracted the attention of Miguel and Inez, who were chatting. She then turned to Carcel. The only time Inez managed to gain my approval was when she made you hers by putting a chain around her neck while you were too young and ignorant. Realizing the timing of events, the Duchess said. Damn it, you were only 6 then, the guy asked awkwardly. I'm sorry, what? She answered immediately. This happened when the Empress announced that you would need to marry Inez. He also remembered this moment, and he felt awkward when Inez's mother voiced it. You cried all day from fear. Honestly, there is not a 6-year-old who would be aware of his own actions at such an age. Lost in memories, the woman said. But Inez was different. She knew exactly what she was doing. I'm telling you, it's the devil in the flesh. Carcel decided not to take the particularly cruel comments from his fiancée's mother seriously. A little while later, the Lord was sitting in a chair opposite Inez, who addressed him. I'm sorry, Carcel. You had a pretty hard time because of my father, didn't you? Her voice was calm, as always. The man watched as the girl twirled a glass of wine in her hand, answering. Everything is fine. After all, I do have many shortcomings. But why are you apologizing? She immediately said. Because I feel guilty. Then she said, Ignore what he says and do as you please. The Lord replied, That's exactly what I already do. Inez responded sharply. I noticed this. You even without any notice set the date for our wedding in 2 weeks. Taking a sip from her glass, she continued. Thanks to your efforts, at my own wedding, I will have to wear the disgusting dress of my mother, who is already 27 years old. Your action was selfish, but I understand that you only did what you thought was necessary. Carcel listened silently to his fiancée's comments. What I want is to marry you, and therefore I have no objections. I have been waiting for you for a long time, so even if this is sudden, I should accept what is happening with a smile. Looking at the girl, the man thought, I know that the thoughts for which she is waiting for this event to happen cannot be called pure. Inez raised her voice again. Carcel, you are too good to be bound by any conventions. Taking another sip from her glass, she continued. I would rather observe your former freedom. I do not want you to wither away under the burden of rules and obligations. After all, the only thing that awaits a plucked flower is death. Carcel decided to counter such a statement. What kind of nonsense is pouring out of your mouth? It's one thing for a grown man to be compared to a flower, but are you really trying to brainwash me now? Without reacting to this question, Inez decided to ask again. Brainwash? Why are you doing this? Carcel answered just as calmly. You speak to me in such a manner as if you are trying to control my mind. What exactly do you intend to do? Closing her eyes, she answered. And I don't intend anything. The man immediately jumped up, speaking. I already kissed you, so I think I expressed myself clearly enough. Inez answered briefly. You were just making an effort. The Lord asked again. An effort? The girl immediately went on the attack. They wanted to get it into my head that in the name of satisfying their own sense of duty, they were ready to do anything, even if it meant that they had to kiss a woman like me. The Lord awkwardly rubbed his neck, thinking, was it really necessary to use these words? But he answered out loud, I have no sense of duty, nor did I hope to drive anything into your head. Sighing heavily, the man looked away. Then he looked into Inez's face again, speaking seriously. You said that you liked me, then later said the opposite, and now suddenly you started acting like this. Now he had to find out her true motives. He continued in a cold tone. They said that you don't want to waste your strength, but you are actively pushing me to the edge of a cliff, as if you can't wait to get rid of me. Have you ever liked me at all during all these years? Every word he said little by little changed her expression, and he asked, If so, since when did you become hated? She asked a question with a blank look. Are you really angry because you don't like me? Her voice was no longer so calm. Notes of indignation and dissatisfaction could be heard slipping through. You know, in this case, whose cow would moo? Haven't you made your choice in favor of a disorderly life? Carcel shuddered at these words. And then an argument sounded throughout the room. Lord said, What's hiding in your tiny pea-sized brain? I don't understand absolutely anything, she answered immediately. Is your inability to comprehend the result of relying on your body and neglecting your gray matter? The man answered, Even after all this time, you still treat me like some idiot with a pretty face? Inez said. Of course, you will not miss an opportunity to mention your attractiveness. How else would you have gotten this far if you didn't have a pretty face? The Lord began to lose his temper. So should I just pretend that my appearance leaves much to be desired? I am definitely much more beautiful than even the most ideal of men. And yes, I hasten to remind you that I was not at all eager to take part in this engagement idea initially. Inez got up from her chair and began to walk towards the groom, speaking. It is true that you were forced into her, just as you were forced into this marriage, so you are not at all obliged to remain faithful to me. Listen, Escalante, I understand why you behaved this way. Carcel, without really listening, said, Well, there is no need for understanding, for I am telling you that after the wedding everything will change, Inez asked. And what exactly will the changes consist of? She raised her hand, expressing her emotionality with gestures. The girl added, Until now, you have lived like a dog, and yet you declare that with your wedding you will suddenly turn into a saint. Do you think I'll buy it? The groom answered immediately. Yes, when we get to our bedroom. She answered skeptically. We'll have separate rooms, Escalante, Lord concluded. Eventually we will sleep together. The answer came immediately. Well, I'm a man and I don't sleep with dogs, Carcel said. Okay, let's say I'm a dog. But these are animals that should live among people. The man approached the girl, hugged her, and said, And therefore, do not release me into the wild as you please. And then he kissed the trembling girl, adding out loud, In the end, the dog always returns home. Then, looking into her uncomprehending face, he said again, breathing heavily, So don't waste your energy on a battle you can't win. I don't know what exactly you're trying to achieve, but it's getting too dangerous. Hearing his words, Inez jerked sharply, retreated, and then, unexpectedly for the man, slapped him in the face, which left him speechless, while the girl remained standing with a straight face. Carcel looked at the girl with fear and misunderstanding, covering the left side of his head with his hand. Inez said, That's right, you were spanked. And I did it. Why do you look so shocked? It couldn't have happened that this was the first time you've been hit in the face. Trembling, the Lord answered, But this didn't hit me in the face, but in the head. And at that time I thought. But, to be honest, judging by this blow, this is not the first time for her. Sighing, she said, The thought that this was your first time weighs me down somewhat. Carcel immediately thought. Speech like an experienced man. Suddenly Inez said, Just don't say that you actually wanted to be spanked, he replied. Inez, there is no one in the world who would like this. She hastened to inform him. You will be surprised how many such people there are. That's why I thought that you might be one of them. Plus, dogs are supposed to run around outside, which is exactly how I would raise them. These speeches hit very hard on the man's self-esteem. The girl continued, Animals should never be allowed into their owner's room, let alone their bed. Wiping blood from his lip, Carcel asked, Are you giving me a warning now? The Duke's daughter answered, Since the beginning was made by you, I myself set some boundaries. And when the time comes, you just quickly move on to the main part. Don't bother with any nonsense like the one you just did." He immediately asked, "What exactly do you mean by unnecessary nonsense?" She answered, "What you did now." Carcel didn't understand. "Are you talking about a kiss?" "In that case, what is the main part?" Inez said. "The very basics, which you can't do without." The Lord asked in no uncertain terms, "Are you talking about this?" The girl answered in a cold tone, "Let's approach things rationally. If we want to please our families, we cannot hold back." The man answered, "You are such a pervert. It turns out that we can't kiss, but there's nothing wrong with intercourse?" Showing no emotion, Inez responded, "Our wedding is a joke anyway. I will appear in an ancient dress, as if following a family tradition. And you, a man who had been wandering outside of Mendoza trying to avoid his bride, suddenly insisted on getting married within 2 weeks." Carcel listened to the bride with a serious face. "Therefore, given our circumstances, I would say that you may well find the situation funny. There is nothing scary here." "However," the Lord said, "I never thought any of this was laugh-worthy." He stated, standing in front of the bride, "In the only future I ever considered, you were my wife. For this reason, I kissed you not out of love, but rather because you will soon become the most important woman in my life." The girl calmly listened to her groom's speech. "I was rude, for which I apologize. Since we were about to get married, I acted carelessly, considering this to be normal. I won't do anything you don't like." The man tilted his head slightly, speaking very seriously. "We are not in love, so if this makes you uncomfortable, I will respect your decision. From now on, I won't kiss you, and I won't do anything else if you ask me to." Politely bowing to his future bride and smiling gallantly, he said, looking at Inez's surprised eyes, "Therefore, for now, I will assume that you are happy with everything except kissing." Inez became a little nervous. Thus, time flew by, and finally, the wedding day arrived. The news of Lord Carcel's marriage to the daughter of Duke Velestena spread like the wind. Everyone in the city discussed this event, even without having the opportunity to attend the ceremony. The loud ringing of bells signaled the beginning. Many guests gathered in the church. The parents of the engaged couple watched this entire celebration with an excited look. Inez walked to the altar, dressed in a snow-white dress. Seeing his future wife, perhaps for the first time not in black, Carcel admired her beauty and attractiveness. He could not take his eyes off her, even though her face expressed neither joy nor happiness. Slightly lowering her gaze, the bride slowly extended her hand to her chosen one. Then, looking at his face, she noticed how worried the guy was. She called out to him quietly, "Carcel, why did he come to his senses?" The groom immediately took her hand and moved a little closer to her. Almost all the guests were delighted looking at this beautiful couple. Luciano, crossing his arms over his chest, watched the newlyweds with displeasure. Carcel and Inez then kissed. The wedding ceremony is permeated with an atmosphere of solemnity and piety. It was a closed wedding, to which only the imperial family and 17 noble families were invited. All of them were now communicating with each other and enjoying the holiday. And although this event could not be called large-scale, neither party regretted participating in it. For no matter what the observers said, the situation continued to remain quiet and calm. It's time to dance. Many guests split into pairs, where a man and a woman merged together in a burst of dance. Inez also decided to take part in this action, taking her older brother Luciano as a partner. They looked like such a beautiful couple that all the other guests stopped at once and made room for only the two of them to dance. Even Carcel watched them silently, not wanting to interfere. He stood behind and just watched. Suddenly, someone asked him a question from behind. "Do you find this song a bit long?" The Lord immediately froze. Then he turned around with a glass in his hand and saw a man in a gray suit with light brown hair, who smiled welcomingly. Carcel only briefly said hello, "Ihar," and then I thought about it myself. That bastard Dante Ihar, eldest son of Duke Ihara, known for his old-fashioned ways. The man spoke again. "You seem nervous." And for a second, they did not take their eyes off the newlywed. Looking at him, Carcel began to think, but in comparison with this subject, I'm like a saint. This bastard has lovers hidden all over the city of Mendoza. The Lord was not particularly happy to see this man, because he had heard about him recently. He immediately remembered. Duke Valestina did everything possible to convey to me that there were plenty of other unspoiled young people who could replace me as Inez's groom. He remembered 3 immediately. The first of them was Enrique Osorno, a dark-haired guy known for his intelligence and scientific achievements, unlike me, who only shows off his muscles. But this was the most harmless option. He also remembered Leonardo Gelve, whom Inez would be able to dispose of at her discretion, because he is several years younger than her. And finally, among the applicants, there was a man with a pleasant face and an orderly personal life. It was Dante who spoke. I see you're waiting for the song to finish, but I'm not sure if it's because you want it to come back to you or because you simply want it out of everyone else's sight. Dante Ichar, who would never stray from the righteous path. Looking at his interlocutor, the Lord thought, ordered personal life, right? Is it he who never strays from the righteous path? What amuses me so much is the fact that he was actually one of the contenders. However, he said it out loud. I believe this should not concern you in any way. Without losing his good mood, Dante said, even now there are people who bet that today you will lay another woman in your marriage bed. If they saw you now with their own eyes, then, as I see it, they would bitterly regret what they did, considering the size of the sums that they are about to lose. The newlywed did not answer dissatisfiedly. What rude things do you say to the groom on his wedding day? However, Ihar continued, I didn't say this to upset you, just pointing out that I think they made a mistake and will lose the bet. Then he pointed his hand at the girl in the wedding dress and said, just look at Inez. I understand why you can't take your eyes off her. But Carcel responded irritably, I don't care whether anyone understands it or not. Looking at the girl who was dancing with her brother, Dante answered, by itself. I thought you would pass out right in the middle of the ceremony. If it were up to me, I wouldn't mind shelling out some money to see this. Without taking his eyes off the beautiful dance, Ihar continued to speak. Nobody could believe their own eyes. Everyone thought that perhaps there was another daughter in Valestin's family, whom no one had ever heard of. However, Carcel practically did not listen to him, thinking. Yes, obviously everyone was shocked. Inez continued to receive a combination of looks of surprise, admiration, and complete shock from them. All the guests looked with admiration at the Lord's new wife. She smiled good-naturedly at those who gazed at her in amazement, simply ignoring anyone who caused irritation. Her behavior was natural, and in high society, she always dominated other nobles. But Inez was still Inez. The only change was in the hairstyle and attire. She may have smiled more often, which was a rare occurrence, but that was just another facial expression. Despite this, the whole world treated her as if absolutely everything had changed in her. Dante spoke sarcastically. And yet I doubt that you will be content with it enough. Although now you may be intoxicated by the novelty. I bet you didn't even realize that her body looked like that under her clothes because she always covered it up. His voice irritated the Lord more and more. Of course, Inez was always beautiful, even when completely covered, but her body was so... Without allowing him to finish, Carcel interrupted him. So what? He was uncomfortable with comments from such an applicant. Without removing his smile, Dante answered, I didn't mean anything like that. Anyway, isn't this some unexpected luck for you? Carcel answered calmly, I've had the opportunity to introduce him before. I am not surprised. Looking around the hall, Ihar said, in any case, I won't interfere with your fun. I don't have any power to do that anyway. As if I could ever defeat my dear friend's handsome face and incredible physique. The newlywed answered rudely, If you know this, then get out of sight. And we're not friends. But the man did not back down. Well, still, when you get tired of the candy bouquet period, please give me the opportunity to console your wife. His voice was poisonous and slippery. He initially planned to offer this idea to the newlywed. However, in reality, things were different. When they kissed at the altar, their lips didn't even touch. And Inez thought, He was so confused about this. All the court ladies looked with delight at the dancing newlyweds. One of the women said out loud, "God, even if I see it with my own eyes, I still can't believe it. Is that woman dancing with Lieutenant Escalante really the Ines Valestena we know?" Some time later, Carcel again came face to face with Dante and his eternal grin. Clenching his hand into a fist, the Lord angrily told him, "If you come to the conclusion that you are bored with life, just let me know. I am with great joy. I'll interrupt her." The interlocutor only sighed, answering, "Women graze next to you one way or another, and for this reason you don't even have to lift a finger. It's as if everyone was just waiting for your proposal. It's really unfair." His words were annoying. You get everything you want and therefore cannot expect Inez to obediently sit at home. In addition, if Inez finds herself a lover, then it will become easier for you to get rid of the gnawing feeling of guilt towards the woman who has been in love with you since she was 6. Having finished this conversation, Carcel stood alone, imagining his smiling wife, and then a group of men who were talking. "If you ever get bored with the candy bouquet period, please give us a chance." A voice familiar from childhood pulled him out of his unpleasant thoughts. "You seem bored." His cousin, also known as Crown Prince Oscar, approached him and spoke. As expected, the Valestina family wine is truly the best. Holding his glass in his hand, the prince continued. "Previously, he could not refuse a single bottle, even despite my pleas, but it seems that he finally decided to part with it precisely for the sake of you, who has now become his son-in-law." Carcel did not quite understand the essence of what was stated when he said, "I beg your pardon, Your Highness." The brother answered immediately, "If she gave preference to, say, Enrique Osorno, it would be a little easier for me to accept this, but why did Inez choose someone like you?" Watching the girl interact with one of the early contenders, Oscar continued, "Just look there. My God, they look so nice together." The newlywed smiled, conducting a dialogue with the scientist. Her smile made the prince say, "You feel quite jealous, don't you?" In the end, Inez is, as expected, stunningly gorgeous. I think you want to keep her with you forever, but I doubt that this is the path to a happy marriage. Looking questioningly at his older brother, Carcel asked, "What does an unmarried man like you know about marriage?" He answered, squeezing his glass. "There are moments like this that you can just talk about, and you don't even have to experience them yourself." After taking a sip of wine, Oscar continued to quip, "Everything is fine. It seems Osorno continues to do a pretty good job of entertaining your wife for you. It seems that everyone around decided to insert their caustic commentary towards their marriage." Oscar was already 27. Even after being rejected by Inez as a teenager, he secretly continued his unsuccessful attempts to court her. In the end, it all ended with him becoming engaged to the niece of the Marquis of Barca, who is now beyond marriageable age, for she had turned 22. But the prince refused to marry, citing the ridiculous excuse that she looked too young. Meanwhile, he only exchanged a few words with Inez, and the reason for this was that the refusal was too categorical. The prince decided to gloat again. "I've never seen her smile so much in front of you. Is it because Enrique is simply an amazing conversationalist? Or maybe they are simply better suited to each other?" Sighing and looking at his brother, Carcel thought, "Damn cousin." And he said it out loud. "When we took part in our first dance, her smile was quite normal." Turning away, the crown prince answered briefly, "It's clear." Touching the new glass, Oscar said, "Her very first smile for you was fake." These words surprised the Lord. He did not understand what these speeches were about. At the same time, Inez continued to chat with Enrique. Suddenly, Carcel rushed forward and grabbed the glass of wine right in front of his brother's face. Then he drank it all down without saying anything. Looking at this in shock, the crown prince stammered, "What an overreaction!" However, Escalante remained adamant. Closing his eyes, Carcel responded angrily, "You may be drinking from my glass, but drinking from a newlywed's glass is unacceptable." He immediately received an answer. "There's no need to worry about Dante Ihara. Over time, he will go bald, just like his father."